Hello, learner. Welcome to Mr. Quickest Teaches. In this lesson, I'll be analyzing Charlotte Perkins Gilman's short story, The Widow's Mite. I'll read portions of the story and explain the different figures of speech, the writer's tone, language, themes in the short story, the imagery, and other stylistic devices that Gilman uses in the short story. Let's dive in. Let's begin by speaking about the author or the writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman. She was born on the 3rd of July 1860 and she died on the 17th of August 1935. She was an American novelist, short story writer, poet, and educator. She was also a well-known feminist who had advocated for the equality of women in society and at home. At the time when she penned this story in 1911, the women's suffrage movement was very active in America. So when we speak about the women's suffrage movement, it was the march, the march to ensure that women have the right to vote. Because around that period, women were not allowed to vote. So the women's suffrage movement, and Gilman was a key part of it. Now let me just give a brief synopsis of the short story before I begin my analysis. The short story deals with the aftermath of the death of a man, and then the sort of the congregation of his wife and 3 children. His wife at this point is a widow, and then we see that the children toss the idea of what to do with her. Thinking that she's someone that is helpless and is someone that is at their mercy. But we see that she turns the table on them, and then it turns out that she's done very well for herself, and then she's prepared for the event. And prepared fantastically. And at the end of it, all the children who initially were trying to toss her around and not wanted to come to their houses now begin to invite her. Now in The Widow's Mite, Gilman tells the story of a tenacious widow who decides to make her life more enjoyable in the immediate aftermath of her husband's death and burial. The title The Widow's Mite foreshadows the decision of the matron of the Macpherson household to pursue a more enjoyable house. So they are the Macphersons. Their entire family is the Macphersons. The story also highlights the themes of the treatment of widows, the effects of unhappy upbringing on family relationship, and its causal effect on family ties. Gilman opens the story by introducing the reader to James. So we are introduced to James, the only son of the Macphersons, and his non-present wife. She's shown as someone that is willing to lie to protect. She shows him. So Gilman shows him, James, as someone that is willing to lie to protect his snobbish wife, even after she refused to come with him to Denver for his father, that's her father-in-law's funeral, and comfort his mother-in-law because it was not as upscale or bourgeois as their base in New York or Europe where they have their summer vacations. So there's something that Gilman does. She tells us what the characters are saying, or in this instance, what James is saying. So James says, for example, that his wife could not leave the children. You see, that's why she couldn't come. So she couldn't leave the children. But we are told that privately, his wife had told him that she didn't want to go. And the reason why is that she didn't want to go to Denver. It was in Europe or somewhere in New York where they live. Then she would have been willing to go. But she didn't want to go to Denver. In fact, we are told that to attend the funeral was not a possibility to her mind. So we see here something that is quite, common in some instances, especially because of the thought that her mother-in-law is not very wealthy. And so because she's not very wealthy, after her husband dies, in this instance, Maud, we're going to see later on that James's wife, his name is Maud, she refuses to come. So she's quite snobbish in that regard. If it was in Europe or in New York, they should have been willing. Then we are also told about two other characters, the female children of the McPhersons, or the female McPhersons, who are married at this point. So Gilman uses the word duty to describe why they are there. So she says, for example, that Ellen and Adelaide were both there. They felt it a duty. So their presence at the funeral wasn't something that they thought was something that they had to do. It was just a duty. Well, let's just do it. So one of the things I see, for example, in the short story is that they have a very cold family relationship. So they are not very warm towards each other. Later on in the story, we are going to see why. They mention, for example, their father and other things, but we see here that the family they're not very close together. So Gilman's use of duty to describe the reason why Ellen and Adelaide, the McPherson daughters, came to the funeral, exposes that members of the McPherson family are not fond of each other. She also reveals that both husbands of the McPherson daughters did not attend their father-in-law's funeral. So Helen's husband did not come, Adelaide's husband did not come as well. And this is what she says. She says, but neither of the husbands had come. So neither of the husbands had come. You know, funeral is where you pay your last respect. And the men ought to pay respect to for whatever is worth to the man through whom their wife, the father of their wives. But they are not shown up. And we were told that Mr. Jennings could not leave his classes in Cambridge. And Mr. Oswald could not leave his business in Pittsburgh. That's what they said. So we see here that there's a snobbish attitude from the in-laws, not only of James's wife Maud, but then Mr. Jennings and also Mr. Oswald. And we're also told that the last service was over. They had a cold, melancholy lunch. Note the use of the word cold, melancholic lunch. The expression, a cold, melancholic lunch, strengthens the idea of the lack of familiar warmth in the family. The expression also suggests that they could not relate to each other on an emotional level and were indifferent to each other. Also, the fact that the three McPherson children planned to leave as soon as possible strengthens the idea that they were not very fond of each other or their mother. In fact, they lingered a little longer because a lawyer was coming to read their late father's will. They also considered the reading of the will as unnecessary, describing it as only a formality. So we are told that they had a cold, melancholy lunch, and then they planned. Look at it. It says, and were all to take the train home again. So that's the plan. The plan was that night they were going to leave, and were all to take the night train home again. So they were not even going to hang out with their mother for long. Now, the next thing we are going to see is the exchange between them. Remember, like I mentioned, we are told that a lawyer is coming. So meanwhile, the lawyer was coming at 4 to read the will. And it's described as, it's only a formality. There can't be much left, said James. So in their minds, they thought that their mother had little or nothing. No, agreed Adelaide. I suppose not. So they begin to speak to each other. A long illness eats everything up. Remember, here it's Ellen that is speaking. And the reason, one of the things we are going to see about Helen is that her husband is also sick as well. So I think she, in some ways, she understands what illness is and the effect that it has on, especially the finances. So she says that long illness eats up everything. And that's an example of personification. And it creates the impression that sickness is a living, insatiable monster or beast that consumes everything before it. More literally, the quote exposes that Mr. McPherson was sick for a long time before he died, which suggests that a lot of money was spent taking care of him. The detail I spoke about Helen's husband being sick, we see it here and says her husband came to Colorado for his long years before and was still delicate. So he came. That's one of the reasons why they live in Colorado, because her husband has weak lungs and he needs a place where it's warm. Well, said James rather abruptly, what are we going to do with mother? So the children begin to wonder what they are going to do with mother. That is, their mother. Well, of course, Ellen began. We could take her. The we there it would depend. It would depend a good deal on how much property there is. I mean, on where she'd want to go. You see, she first of all talks about how much property there is before she now says, well, on where she would want to go, where their mother would want to go. Edward's salary is more than needed now. Helen's mental health process seemed a little mixed. That's what Gilman tells us. So she first of all says that the reason why we would take her is it depends on how much property there is. And then now she now says, well, where mother wants to go. And then now she begins to talk about the fact that her husband's salary is needed now. And we're told by Gilman that Ellen's mental process, so the way she was thinking was a bit mixed. Now let's look at the McPherson children, and then we're going to talk about their exchange. The McPherson children, Ellen, she lives in Colorado. She's married to Edward, who is described as a very sickly man because he has problems with his lungs and is described as still delicate. So it tells us that he's not someone that is fully recovered. The second McPherson child is Adelaide. She was more open to their mother living with her, but she added that her mother would not like to move to Pittsburgh because that's where she lives. And then the third of the McPherson children is James. At the time, their mother was 50 years old. The reader finds out her age because James asked. The fact that he did not know his mother's age suggests that he was not too close to her and her birthday is not celebrated or acknowledged. The use of broken to describe Mrs. McPherson and long strain to describe her life suggests that she sacrificed a great deal for her family. James's house is said to be the biggest and nicest of the McPherson children, so we're going to see that later. So observe the words that Ellen uses. We could, it would, so, and we see that. And then we see the next person that speaks is Adelaide. And says she can come with me if she prefers. Of course, said Adelaide. But I don't think it would be very pleasant for her. Mother never did like Pittsburgh. So around this period, in the exchange or the dialogue between the siblings, there is this sense that Adelaide is the one that is more welcoming to their mother. But we're going to see that that's not the case at all. James looked from one to the other. Let me see, how old is mother? So this way asked about the age of mother. Oh, she's all of 50, answered Helen, and much broken, I think. It's been a long strain, she turned plaintively to her brother. I should think you could take her, you could make her more comfortable than either of us, James, with your big house. So one of the things we see here is that the exchange, the dialogue between the siblings. I'm going to talk about the importance of dialogue, the fact that Gilman uses dialogue to allow the reader here verbatim the words or the communication between the siblings. Now we are told here that it was James that asked his sisters what they should do about their mother, and we see that he asks. We are told that he asked it abruptly. Right? So the use of abruptly shows that he did not think much about it. Something that just came to his mind. His question, what are we going to do with mother, is very cold. It's like, it presents their mother as a problem. Oh, what are we going to do with it? It's like their mother is a problem, and then how do they deal with this problem that they have? Helen's response also betrays her coldness to her mother. She uses could and would to show that she is not certain. So again, we see that the McPherson children had no, concrete plan for their mother. She was not certain of what to do. Although she claimed that she wants to house their mother, her decision was dependent on how much property there is, how much could be accrued from the sale of the property, and where their mother would choose to live. She also alluded to the insufficiency of her husband's salary. So we see that where she says it. She's like, my Edward's salary is much needed now. So she sort of signals that, she's not very keen on offering or giving their mother accommodation. Gilman highlights Helen's thoughtlessness and the lack of care for her mother by describing her thought as a little mixed. So we see that in terms of the attitude of Gilman to the children, she's not very warm towards them. His sister also intoned that mothers are known to be happier in their sons' houses than their daughters. So remember, like I mentioned, or we see in the story that Helen told James that, I mean, you should house mother. You have a massive house. You have a very big house. And so you should be able to accommodate her. You should be able to give her somewhere to live. To which the sister says, I think a woman is always happier. A woman there is like their mother would be happier living with a son than with a daughter's husband, said Adelaide. I've always thought so. That's often true, her brother admitted. But it depends, he stopped. And the sisters exchanged glances. They knew upon what it depended. So, Adelaide does not want her mother. James does not want their mother. Helen does not want the mother as well. Now, although James agreed with his sisters, he qualified his answer with, it depends. Gilman reveals that his sisters knew upon what it depended. The reader gleans that it depended on his wife, Maud. So we're going to see more about Maud as the story develops. So it depends on Maud, if Maud will agree. And since she was not fond of her mother-in-law, James would likely refuse to accommodate his mother. So James would not accommodate his mother because his wife would not be welcoming of that kind of decision. Then we see that Helen now offered to accommodate their mother if James agreed to provide support. Although she meant financial support, she did not mention it directly. So this is what it's seen. So it says, perhaps if she stayed with me, you could help some, suggested Helen. So we see that Helen signals, but it's not very clear. She sort of drops it somewhere. And then James responds, of course, I could do that. He agreed with evident relief. So he was happy that, his sisters have brought to the table the fact that they'll be willing to house their mother. Now, the use of a repetition by James, of course, twice, emphasizes his evident relief that the option of him housing their mother had been taken off the table. He continues that if his sisters agreed to provide alternating custody for their mother, he would provide them financial support, pay a board. That's how he describes this. So she might visit between you, take turns, and I will pay her board. About how much ought it to amount to? We might as well arrange everything now. So immediately that idea comes on the table, James rushes at it. And he doesn't want it to be taken off the table again. James was also keen to make the necessary agreements as soon as possible, probably because he did not want his sisters to change their minds. His keenness is exposed by him saying, we might as well arrange everything now. So he wants his sisters to agree immediately that they will house their mother. Things cost awfully these days, Helen said, with a crisscross of fine wrinkles on her pale forehead. But of course, it would be only just what it costs. I shouldn't want to make anything. Very soon, we're going to see that the sisters begin to jostle for their mother when they see the amounts that will be paid. Helen, the more talkative of the sisters, told him things cost awfully these days, as a way to prepare James's mind that taking care of their mother would be expensive, before adding, I shouldn't want to make anything, to create the illusion that her decision is not profit-driven. So she's not doing it for profit. It's something that she just wants to do. And now look at how her sister responds, or her sister's response. It's work and care, Helen, and you may as well admit it. You need all your strength. With those sickly children and Edward on your hands. When she comes to me, Adelaide is one speaking here now. When she comes to me, there need be no expense, James, except for clothes. I have room enough, and Mr. Oswald would never notice the difference in the house bills. But he does hate to pay out money for clothes. So now, if you observe, Adelaide is trying to present her sister as somebody that is not ideal to accommodate their mother because her children are sick and her husband is also sick. So you leave her with me, because their brother said he was going to pay for board. However, Adelaide wanted Helen to be more forthright with her response. She raised the issue of Helen's sick children and husband before saying that if she, Adelaide, accommodated their mother, she would only ask for money to buy clothes, or to buy her mother clothes, because her husband, Mr. Oswald, would be unwilling to buy them. Adelaide's words and attitude towards Helen also suggests that she realizes that there's a chance that she will profit if she agrees to accommodate their mother. That is why she tries to show that she's better prepared to accommodate her. This shows that, like her sister, she does not want to accommodate their mother because she loves her best. but because she stands to profit monetarily. So immediately James mentions that he's going to pay for board, the sisters begin to jostle for the right to host their mother. Hello, learner. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson so far. This is a sample analysis of this short story. To purchase the full analysis of this short story or the entire 10 short stories in your collection, visit mrquakersteaches.com. There you have access to the passage-based questions and also general questions and elements of literature in each of the short stories. See the purchase links in the description below. See you in class.